je suis ravie d'avoir l'occasion de vous parler de David Hume, le bon David. Mais je vais le faire en anglais parce que je veux être intelligible. C'est très aimable de votre part de m'accommoder et je vous en remercie. In English, okay. Voici les textes. So these are the texts I'm going to talk about. I don't know how familiar you all are with them, but there's a lovely online a website, davidhume.org, that has all of them, and they are the best editions, the best current editions. So it's a very good thing. But I'm going to begin talking mostly about Hume's essays, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend because they are so much fun. And the collection of essays opens with a very short and very charming essay called Of the Delicacy of Taste and Passion. And the essay describes people with a certain delicacy of passion, which makes them extremely sensible to all the accidents of life and gives them a lively joy upon every prosperous event. I'm here quoting from that passage, as well as a piercing grief when they meet with misfortunes and adversity. I should say, actually, I'm going to move this over there.
You can close it because I can see it if you want.
Okay, no, I need to see this, yes. That's right, I could close this, you're right. I should say that Hume is here using the word delicacy in a sense in English that is now quite rare. It means a keen or acute perceptiveness. So Hume goes on then to describe how those who are subject to this delicacy are quick both to friendship and to resentment, are extraordinarily sensitive to distinctions and to signs of contempt, and tend to fall wholesale into whatever highs and lows they experience. And I find that this essay is very popular among young students. And I think that's because they take it to be addressed to them and describing their sorts of difficulties with emotional regulation. And the essay offers a remedy, what Hume dubs delicacy of taste, resembles delicacy of passion insofar as, sorry, I'm having a little trouble clicking. Here we go. There. Insofar as it produces the same sensibility to beauty and deformity of every kind, but it does so without what Hume considers to be incommodious or inconvenient in passion. So by cultivating delicacy of taste, we are less apt to be transported beyond all bounds of prudence and discretion, and to take false steps in the conduct of life, which are often irretrievable. Now, Hume's forthright advocacy for delicacy of taste is, I think, really unusual in his work. And so I think it's worth a bit more examination. Now, delicate taste, he tells us, has the same effect as delicacy of passion in enlarging the spheres both of our happiness and of our misery, and makes us sensible to pains as well as pleasures which escape the rest of mankind. So that's not this passage yet. Taste is a matter of sensibility to beauty and deformity of every kind. For that reason, Hume thinks we have much greater, if not absolute, control over sources of pleasure and displeasure than do those with passionate sensitivity, who are at the mercy of ever-changing accidents of life. And that's what this passage is about. For Hume contends that we're pretty much masters of what books we will read, what diversions we shall partake of, and what company we shall keep. And since, as he says, a wise man will endeavor to place his happiness on such objects chiefly as depend upon himself, and that is not to be attained so much by any other means as by this delicacy of sentiment. So short as the essay is, it's really very short. So good bedtime reading. It does go on to give a long list of the benefits of this delicate taste. It has great enjoyment, it allows for great enjoyment, it helps develop sense and judgment, it helps improve our sensibility, and so on and so forth. Whoops, now it's getting overly delicate. Now the sales pitch that Hume offers may seem to just prescribe the cultivation of delicate taste as the surest path to happiness and the good life for human beings. But I don't actually think that's the case. So I don't think he's like recommending that everybody become a kind of aesthete. Some people, for instance, those with what he calls cool and sedate tempers, may neither need this cure nor be equipped to practice it. And more generally, and this is one of my sorts of themes in perhaps my entire life, I think that Hume is committed to the thought that a flourishing society needs and encourages a variety of temperaments, characters, and forms of life. And I also think, yet more generally, that he is a pluralist of sorts in many areas of his philosophy. And that's a very big claim. I've argued some for it in print. More importantly, so have Michael Gill and Kate Abramson and other very good people. And today what I want to do is argue a little bit for Hume's pluralism about taste, in several senses of taste, and its contribution to happiness. So with that as my end, let me draw our attention to a feature of the essay that might get lost in the sales pitch for how to relieve overly delicate passion. And it's something that might be the very best candidate for Hume for a universally important constituent of a good life. Not completely sure about this, but it's a good candidate for it. So consider now how he closes the essay. For one who has reworked their delicacy from passion to taste, all right, the gaiety and this is the very last line here, the gaiety and frolic of a bottle companion improves into a solid friendship. Jonathan is quite taken with the phrase bottle companion. Yeah. And the ardors of a youthful appetite become an elegant passion. So the selling point here is not just the elegance of one's passions, although that's important. Equally important is the capacity for solid friendship. And Hume offers two reasons for this effect on character. So first, cultivated taste draws off the mind from the hurry of business and interest, cherishes reflection, disposes to tranquility, and produces an agreeable melancholy, which of all dispositions of the mind is the best suited to love and friendship. Second, it hones our capacity for friendship. So a delicacy of taste is favorable to love and friendship by confining our choice to a few people and making us indifferent to the company and conversation of the greater part of men. And Hume treats this selectivity, or at least so I'm going to be trying to argue, as a condition for the sort of friendship he has in mind. It's, I think, a crucial element in turning associations from bottle companions to solid friendship. Hume also suggests that taste can allow us to exercise that selectivity properly. So higher and more refined taste enables us to judge of the characters of men, of compositions of genius, and so on and so forth. But I'm interested particularly in the judging of the characters of men. So in short, delicate taste puts us in the mood for friendship, encourages us to be selective in our friendships, and equips us to make good judgments about who could be a friend. So these are the themes that I want to talk about today. I have sort of a long setup here. How Hume's psychology, moral philosophy, and aesthetics connect friendship and the development of taste. And I've not found much secondary literature treating these connections. There's two short pieces by Margaret Watkins, who I highly recommend, and apparently an Italian publication of 1986 by Giancarlo Carabelli that I could not access. Looks very interesting though. So all of this is sort of exploratory work. And I hope what it will do is make a case for more attention to the nature and conditions for Humean friendship and its relation to taste. Now, friendship can surely come in degrees, from the bottle companion to the solid relationship enabled by delicate taste. But Hume does, I think, treat solid friendship as essentially selective. So it's not the love of mankind merely as such, which is what, for instance, Francis Hutcheson supposes. Hume insists that there must be some personal qualities or services or relation to ourself to win our esteem, love, or affection. So mere contiguity, mere nearness, and the sympathy that might engender may be enough to explain our general love of company, and resemblance may be enough to explain why, as he puts it, an Englishman in Italy is a friend, a European in China, and so on and so forth. But love or friendly feeling gathers force by being confined to a few persons. And the inquiry concerning the principles of morals also notes the importance of a narrow focus in our affections. So here he says that it's wisely ordained by nature that private connections should commonly prevail over our universal views and considerations, since otherwise affections and actions would be dissipated and lost, et cetera, et cetera. So I think to understand how Hume distinguishes friendship from other relations, even though there's lots of different kinds of friendship, I'm still going to sort of concentrate on this selective, solid friendship, because that seems the most important kind. So let me run through what might be a few hallmarks of this kind of friendship. One is it holds between persons who love or esteem each other. I didn't even put it down there because that seems obvious. He also seems to think that the status between friends is more or less equal, at least in the sense that one should not be a dependent of the other, like a servant or a child or a pet. The importance of some parity of status may be why Hume compares friends most frequently to siblings, brothers in particular, rather than to relations from different generations. And the same point informs a large part of Hume's pitch for the middle station of life in the essay of the same name, which I'll talk about later. Hume also seems to conceive of the relationship as a voluntary one we enter into by choice, although it may not be up solely to our choice. And that's one of the selling points for the delicacy of taste. We can control the circumstances in which we exercise our taste, and that includes choosing our friendly companions. Maintaining the friendship, I take it, is also to some degree a choice, and so friendships can end. There do seem to be additional constraints on who is just a candidate for friendship. I don't think separation in space is a huge problem for Hume, but temporal distance does sap the liveliness of our feelings. And as he says, I cannot feel the same lively pleasures from the virtues of a person who lived in Greece as I feel from the virtues of a familiar friend and acquaintance. So we can't, I take it, be friends with Pericles. But friendships, I think why this is important is that for Hume, friendships seem to require exchange of some sort. So love and esteem, even reciprocal love and esteem, attended with wishes for each other's good, are not enough if, so to speak, they remain one-sided and there's no kind of interaction or exchange between each person. Friendship involves a return of and on affections by each for the other. And I take it that's really important because such exchange provides causal contacts for Hume and establishes something that I think is really central to friendships for Hume. And that's imaginative associations linking the ideas of the persons and a strong sympathy between the friends. I'm using sympathy here in Hume's special sense. So sympathy for Hume, it's not itself a passion, it's a mechanism which allows for the causal communication of passions and sentiments, and also opinions for that matter, between persons using pathways that are established by sense perception and imagination. So sympathetic communication tends to reproduce similar passions. So there's a little controversy there, but the sympathetic communication may still displace the person or the object at whom a passion is directed. And the result is, for instance, I think this is important for friendship because the esteem of my friend may be a cause of pride for me. And that's a good thing because pride is in general is sort of a good thing for Hume, and it's very crucial to our sense of self for him. And so it's not the monkish notion of pride. Pride is a good thing. Now, these aren't meant to be, by the way, anything like sufficient considerations for friendship, but I do think we can just say typically friendships are matters. There's a bit about sympathy. Friendships are typically matters of two-way interactions between persons involving love and a wish for the other's good, which we maintain voluntarily with a small number of our peers. Again, the interplay between friends establishes close connections between the ideas of the friends in the imagination and associations strong enough for us to readily extend our what Hume calls our indirect passions, which are person-directed passions of pride and humility, love and hate, through the links that friendship establishes. So friendship, I don't think for Hume means, to use a cliche, what is mine is thine, but it does mean that what belongs to you is thereby related sufficiently to me to be, for instance, a cause of my pride or a cause of my liking for you. So friendship is going to forge imaginative associations that link the ideas of these persons very closely, and that allows all sorts of psychological mechanisms for Hume. And here's some examples in treatise book 2, part 2, section 2 of the Treatise of Human Nature. There's a section called Experiments to Confirm this System. And that gives a number of examples of how causes of pride can proliferate and be extended through associations with friends and relations. And these are just a bunch of different examples of this. All of the bonds, though, by which we can extend the causes or objects of these indirect passions, of pride and love, humility and hate, blood and friendship, a phrase Hume uses, those seem to be the most potent and the ones to which he appeals most frequently. Now, the associations among friends, and then among the ideas of the friends, likewise grease the wheels of sympathy and strengthen this special Humean sympathy beyond the general kind of fellow feeling that he thinks is shared with those who are simply nearby. So through sympathy, we come to share a friend's passions, sentiments, opinions, and perhaps even their tastes. I mean, actually say that's even more than just perhaps. The treatise explains sympathetic communication by tracing its causal mechanism. And so I'm going to give you a little animation to show you what this is like. So we begin by observing expressions of some passion or sentiment in another person. There we are observing them. And thus, then we form a belief that they experience that passion or sentiment. Sympathy, through a very weird little mechanism that Hume describes, then vivifies that belief into a full-fledged experienced passion. It does so by exploiting imaginative relations between the idea of the other and the idea, or as Hume puts it, near impression of the self, to funnel vivacity to the belief. So resemblance is one such association. And then what it does, you sort of borrow from the idea of self, you transfer vivacity to the passion you think the other experiences, and that vivifies it into the felt experience. All right. And the result is, now I'm sad too, right? I showed the little teardrop. And, the close relations between friends eases the way for each of these steps. One can, just from the start, one can read the internal states of a friend more easily than those of a stranger, maybe even than those of your relatives. And the associations between yourself and the friend are strong and multiple. So these, lots of arrows at the bottom here. In short, we can readily imagine our way into our friend's shoes, and so we readily gain sympathy with their passions, sentiments, and opinions. So I hope that you can now sort of start to see how important friendship might be for Hume's moral philosophy and his account of happiness. It's riding on all these sorts of psychological mechanisms he describes. Now, Hume presents unrelieved solitude as an unmitigated evil, perhaps the greatest punishment we can suffer. And so here's his phrase: let all the powers and elements of nature conspire to serve and obey one man. He will still be miserable till you give him some one person at least with whom he may share his happiness and whose esteem and friendship he may enjoy. This misery arises, I take it, in the absence of any opportunities for sympathy. Without sympathy, we suffer a kind of inertness such that every pleasure languishes. And this is a very long passage. I won't read it all, but I think it illustrates this. Sympathy, Hume declares, this is the bottom, the sole or animating principle of all our passions, even passions like avarice and revenge, which seem very antisocial. To be cut off from the thoughts and sentiments of others drains our passions of any force and leads to, well, an almost catatonic depression. So to be bereft of special friends may be less harrowing, but it's still a punishment. So consider here how Hume describes some unfortunate term. He talks about Asiatic manners in polygamy. And he is in Hume's assessment, polygamy makes both love between the sexes and any kind of friendship impossible. So it's destructive to friendship as to love. Jealousy excludes men from all intimacies and familiarities with each other. No one dares to bring his friend to his house or table, lest he bring a lover to his numerous wives. And then he describes poor Solomon, who's living with 1,000 domestic partners, is nonetheless writes pathetically concerning the vanity of the world. And Hume suggests, had he tried the secret of one wife or mistress, a few friends, and a great many companions, he might have found a life somewhat more agreeable. Destroy love and friendship, what remains in the world worth accepting? This is a favorite passage for a lot of people because he continues to say interesting things about the relations in marriage. But I think it's very interesting for the account of friendship. So there are some salient differences, I think, for Hume between marriage and simple friendship. But Hume actually argues that marriage is most successful when he says it respects that nearness of rank, not to say equality, which is to say equality, which nature has established between the sexes. We are by nature their lovers, their friends, their patrons. So a good chunk of the case here is that polygamy and attendant practices make friendly relations impossible in any arena. And that seems to be one of the most damning features Hume finds for it. Now, perhaps the strongest statement of the importance of friendship comes in the essay of the middle station of life, which, by the way, was withdrawn. So it's a little bit, kind of wonder why it was withdrawn, but it's a very interesting essay. And Hume advocates the advantages of this form of life, the middle station of life, with unusual force, declaring that it's the most favorable to happiness as well as to virtue and wisdom. And he turns to friendship to make good on the first two claims. But there is another virtue that seems principally to lie among equals, and is for that reason chiefly calculated for the middle station of life. This virtue is friendship. Hume then goes on to explain how the middle station facilitates both sincerity and reciprocal exchange, so that, quote, my commerce with my friend is varied both by obligations given and received, and neither have their pride mortified by being the recipient of one-sided favors. Now, were our goal only to benefit humanity in general, we should wish to be placed among the great because they have, as it says here, large opportunities of doing good to their fellow creatures, which Hume sees the advantage of that, but it seems to pale for him in comparison to the worth of solid friendship. By the way, Adam Smith says very similar things like this in The Theory of Moral Sentiments. I don't think it's quite as good as Hume, but it's an interesting comparison. So this telling passage from the essay presents friendship not just as an ingredient of happiness, but as a virtue. Calling friendship a virtue, I take it, is shorthand for the character trait of being able and willing to enter into friendships. I think there actually might be several distinct virtues here. One is a kind of the sort of general friendliness, which 18th century people sometimes called complacence. And that involves just thoughtfulness, politeness, being willing to accommodate yourself to other people. But another virtue might be the ability and readiness to form these solid friendships that Hume talked about before. And I think that these are distinct virtues, although I'm guessing a little bit. But consider here the fable of Cleanthes from the Enquiry concerning the principles of morals. So Cleanthes is a kind of moral superhero. And it distinguishes between his praiseworthy cheerfulness and wit in general company and the virtues he shows to those who know him more familiarly. And the conclusion of the same work, I think, uses both kinds of friendship to illustrate each of the divisions of virtue. So friendship is agreeable both to self and to other. It's also useful to others, and how it might be useful to self may vary with circumstances, but surely it is sometimes useful to self. So now there are also cases where friendship might bring us some grief. The essay, The Skeptic, describes how a person of imbecility of temper may be who is easily broken by affliction, is more unhappy for being endowed with a generous and friendly disposition, which gives him a lively concern for others and exposes him the more to fortunes and accidents. But I think in this case, the fault lies with the imbecility of temper, not with being friendly. Still, even a solid friendship with somebody like Cleanthes could expose one to grief and harm in very unfortunate circumstances. I mean, you'd be sad if something happened to Cleanthes. But actually, the same thing can be said about any virtue, practically, for Hume. Not practically, any virtue for Hume, just about. Hume understands virtues to be character traits that elicit approval when we consider what it would be like to be within the narrow circle of a person with that trait, or simply to perhaps be that person. The traits that go into friendship produce only approval, and so they count as virtues. Okay. And in the essay of Moral Prejudices, Hume even goes so far as to paint those who fail to appreciate friendship, particularly solid friendship, as kind of morally maimed. So I hope it now makes some sense why friendship counts as a virtue, and why it for Hume counts as a natural virtue rather than what he calls an artificial virtue. So friendships do not draw their value from any of what he calls artifices, which are kind of social constructions. Something like justice requires the social construction of property to be a virtue, but friendship doesn't. Friendship is a natural virtue. There may be rules of politeness that ease the way of friendship, and there might be certain social conditions that promote the flourishing of friendship, but it's still a natural virtue. The propensity for friendship is deeply embedded in human nature for Hume. So there's really no puzzle there about why a friendly character, whatever that means, is naturally pleasing to us. Still, if it's going to count as genuinely moral approval for Hume, and thus involve the recognition of a virtue, our sentiment, the pleasure we have in contemplating this character, must conform to what he calls some common point of view, or common and communicable point of view. So you can't approve of somebody just for completely partisan reasons. So if Putin approves, is very happy that Donald Trump was a useful idiot, that's not making useful idiocy a virtue, even for Putin. Friendship counts as a virtue because we can approve of it in an appropriately impartial and generally intelligible stance. I'm emphasizing all that, though, because friendship occupies a kind of funny niche in the moral landscape for Hume. Friendship, along with familial relations and self-interest, is what most generates partiality, favoritism, prejudice, you might say. Like the natural preference for family, friendship biases us towards promoting the interests of those we love and biases us towards judging them favorably. And that's natural and expected, and actually something we approve of, all right? So the essay of Moral Prejudices actually looks askance, very disapproving of the ancient philosopher who stated that he would not be reconciled to his brother who solicited his friendship simply because he was his brother. So, Hume thinks this is just weird, right? It's bad and strange and unnatural. We expect and demand that parents show special favor and care for their children. And so we might expect that people will be at least somewhat partial to their friends. Loyalty and commitment seem to be a part of solid friendship along with affection. Now, all of these are what Hume calls kind affections, which taken together typically overbalance all the selfish impulses in anybody's constitution. And Hume thinks that this is a kind of generosity that he says must be acknowledged to the honor of human nature. But he adds, so noble an affection, instead of fitting men for large societies, is almost as contrary to them as the most narrow selfishness. The very things that we may most value about a solid friendship, extensive sympathy, warm affection between friends, and so on, contribute to what Hume calls the limited generosity that has to be overcome in order to establish genuine civil society beyond a very narrow circle. And I'm not going to try to get into sort of Hume's like political philosophy here, but fortunately, he describes a number of countermeasures that we have, and these are what he calls artifices, again, social constructions that allow us to trust that our persons, our property, and our promises are still respected even when personal sympathies give out, because you're dealing with too many people. But the point I actually want to make is you can still feel torn. You may recognize that your friend justice or promise keeping may mean that you are going to have to disappoint your friend, and you can feel torn by that. And I want to maintain that conflicts, or at least tensions, can remain among the various traits that we value as virtues. So parental love can clash with sober and impartial judgment. Parental care may clash with the demands of friendship. We know this, and that's why we establish, for instance, measures to reduce conflicts of interest. Even with those, though, balancing all of the competing considerations that are natural, valuable, and estimable can be very hard. And this is one of the main reasons why I think that Hume is a kind of moral pluralist. So, for example, the way he describes the virtue of justice, it makes exceptionless demands, but he also acknowledges that there are other virtues besides justice, such as charity and friendship. And it doesn't follow from the exceptionless, uncontextual nature of justice that we may not sometimes prefer to exercise other virtues, or at least that we can value them even when they're in tension. And I think that we can see this kind of pluralism at work in the passage where Hume discusses the characters of Caesar and Cato as drawn by Sallust, both of whom are virtuous, but the one produces love, the other esteem. The one is amiable, the other awful. We could wish to meet the one character in a friend, the other character we would be ambitious of in ourselves. And he repeats that this passage comes up several times, by the way. Also, again, Adam Smith uses the same contrast, but he gives it a different interpretation, which is very interesting. Now, Donald Ainsley has argued that a character trait needs to be prominent, to stand out from the crowd, to count as a virtue, or sort of count among the natural virtues, I should say. One person may have several prominent virtues, but I think for the reasons I've been describing, a single person could not monopolize them all, despite the figure of Cleanthes. So what I want to suggest is that just as our moral sentiments and evaluations may be pluralist, there may be a kind of division of labor among the virtuous. So some characters stand out for their quick wit, others for their prudence, some for benevolence, some for the excellence of their impartial judgment, and so forth. And so I think by the same token, some people may be conspicuous and estimable for various virtues of friendship, which may sometimes put them in tricky situations. For example, if they take on a position of authority. And I think that there doesn't have to be any conceptual problem recognizing that virtues of friendship may create friction with other virtues if we take a pluralist approach. So I'm gonna end with sort of one last description of a kind of pluralism by turning to an issue that I think is central to Hume's understanding of personal happiness. And that's how we select the particular friends with whom we can form solid friendships. So the set of character traits that readies one for such friendships constitutes a natural virtue. It also seems, by that very fact, to be a necessary condition for forging solid friendships with another. And beyond that, we also seek out particular friends or particular people as friends for the various virtues that they show. And that's not because we're like looking for saints. It's almost by definition. So the character traits that garner moral approval are those that would inspire love of some sort within somebody's narrow circle. Hume has a very, very diverse array of what counts as virtues. Friendship places the friends in each other's narrow circles and positions them to appreciate a wide array of their friends' virtues. Now, there are virtues, I think, that don't tend to arouse friendship by themselves. So, Sallust Caesar may be admirable without wanting to sort of seek his company or be his bottle companion. And if we have some sort of like deformed kind of outlook, if we're eaten up by envy and malice, we may have strange notions of the virtues we look for in friends. We may not even be capable of friendship. But nonetheless, the grounds for choosing a friend for solid friendship is that they have some traits we can value as virtues beyond being nearby and within the reach of a bottle. But it doesn't follow from that we become friends with everybody who has virtues, or even everybody who has the sociable virtues of a Cato. And this is not simply because life is short and we only meet a small number of people who might be our best friends where circumstances different. So here I want to return to what was said before about the delicacy of taste and passion. So remember what Hume says, that a delicacy of taste is favorable to love and friendship by confining our choice to a few people and making us indifferent to the company and conversations of the greater parts of men. Now, maybe Hume is simply just, deprecating the greater part of men, but I don't think so. The essay is defending the development of certain kinds of sensitivity to beauty and revulsion to deformity, presumably. It's defending a kind of aesthetic taste. And in choosing friends, I think we exercise such a kind of taste. The taste is personal and thus selective. Now, in saying that we exercise a taste in choosing our friends is, I think, a pretty easy thing to say. It shouldn't seem odd, although maybe saying it's selective and personal will be. And that's because Hume generally treats moral judgments themselves in terms of taste. Sorry, I just lost my place. Yes. Moral judgments are responses to a kind of moral beauty or deformity. The aesthetic character of moral judgments is something that Hume really stresses when he talks about our responses to useful traits. So utility itself invokes an immediate and pleasurable sentiment. He talks about, compares it to the aesthetic pleasure of seeing a sleek racehorse or well-cultivated fields. So in this sense, moral judgments look like a subset of aesthetic judgments that are directed specifically at character traits. But I don't think that's quite right. I'm going to say the way that we select our solid friends actually diverges from typical moral judgment insofar as we may and perhaps should be selective in our tastes in a way that we should not with moral judgment. So moral judgment, I think, carries something a little bit like a duty to recognize the useful and agreeable traits other people have as virtues. Some of this is just a matter of being fair to others' characters, but sometimes it's just kind of a simple epistemic demand. If we wish to converse with others on intelligible terms, as Hume stresses, we need to conform to their language and at least some of their judgments. Talking about natural virtues then requires us to speak, so to speak, to imagine from a common point of view what it would be like to be in the narrow circle of that person. But in choosing, and so that's a requirement to just be basically competent moral judges. But in choosing friends, I think we're allowed significantly more leeway in indulging our personal tastes, even highly idiosyncratic and highly personal ones. And I think we can see this in the centerpiece of, or see this, this selectivity in the centerpiece of Hume's Aesthetics, which is the essay of the standard of taste. And Hume there tries to steer a course between denying that beauty is a property of objects and maintaining that there is nonetheless a yardstick for measuring better and worse taste. Beauty depends on our response to candid objects, but some people are better equipped to respond appropriately, which I understand as on the basis of publicly available features of the object that can be compared to other relevant objects. The judgments of such people provide a measure for taste in general. And so here Hume lays out the characteristics that standard setting critics need: strong sense, united to delicate sentiment, improved by practice, perfected by comparison, and clear to all prejudice. These abilities equip the aesthetic judge to respond to features of the object and to do so against the appropriate comparison class. And so they make up the virtue of being a true judge who's entitled to this valuable character. With rare and valuable traits of which we impartially approve, true aesthetic judges demonstrate a genuine moral virtue. It's a sort of an isolated one, but it's a moral virtue nonetheless. It qualifies them as experts, and it explains why the joint verdict of such, wherever they are to be found, is the true standard of taste and beauty. So the true judge has rare abilities, and that's something that can be recognized by others, even if they don't have those abilities themselves, both because they can glean information about the judge's experience, and because the sort of sensitivity to features of objects that mark true judges enables them to point to relevant features, thereby justifying, as he puts it, justifying their judgments. And really, it's a matter of teaching others their taste. That's, at least that's the way I read it. What a good judge of taste judges is not itself a virtue, but the character of a good judge shows a virtue. All right. But I think that essay of the delicacy of taste and passion might suggest that those with delicate taste are also more than ordinarily good moral judges. Remember that it holds that a higher and more refined taste enables us to judge the characters of men. Now that sounds like moral judgment right there. And I think it is, but only in a kind of trivial way. That delicacy of taste enables us to judge fairly who might be a good candidate for solid friendship. The refined character judge must take it that their friends to be have the sorts of sociable traits to be capable of solid friendship. But, so to speak, friendship-ready character judges must do more. They must judge whether another would be able to form a solid friendship with themselves, right? And that part of judging the characters of men looks to me to be more a matter of a kind of personal taste than a matter of conforming to a common publicly shared moral viewpoint. It's not an unintelligible personal taste, but not one that perhaps is commonly shared. Now, in Of the Standard of Taste, Hume does describe the true standard of taste in beauty to be, and here's this passage, the joint verdict of such judges wherever they are to be found, which sounds a little bit as if judgment issues from kind of a panel of judges that are tasked with reaching consensus. I don't think Hume could really mean this, although this is a point where many accounts of Hume's aesthetics, people differ. But I think that Hume allows far too many kinds of diversity that, as he puts it, are entirely blameless on both sides, and leave no room to give one the preference above the other. So he says, we may all feel a predilection. It is in this passage, I think, isn't it? We may all feel a predilection for that which suits our particular turn and disposition, which gives rise to, as he calls it, innocent and unavoidable, as well as indisputable preferences. And Hume gives a long list of innocent and unavoidable predilections that individuals might have for literature. They cover everything from subject matter to style. So one person's more pleased with the sublime, another with the tender, a third with raillery. One has a strong sensibility to blemishes, and another has a more lively feeling of beauties and pardons absurdities. For one, elevated or pathetic stroke, etc., etc. Comedy, tragedy, satire, odes have each its partisans who prefer that particular species of writing to all others. Now, in some ways, Hume seems to downplay the partisan differences in taste among those qualified to judge, but he does identify a very wide variety of these differences. And one of the sources of variation he identifies is the different humors of particular men. And it seems unlikely that that variation could ever be eliminated or even much reduced. As Hume puts it, it is vain to divest ourselves, or to try to divest ourselves of those propensities which are natural to us. So I just think there's no reason to think that there's going to be much overlap between a taste that is extremely studious of correctness and one who likes conciseness and energy, and one that relishes copious, rich, and harmonious expression with a great deal of ornament. The essay, The Skeptic, is even more forceful in insisting that there is a considerable diversity in the sentiments of beauty and worth, and that education, custom, prejudice, caprice, and humor frequently vary our tastes of this kind. And most importantly, none of these essays ever suggest that there's any need to eliminate such pluralism of taste. It really is let a thousand flowers bloom. Now, in describing the innocent and unavoidable differences in taste, Hume makes an interesting comparison to illustrate how benign personal differences in taste may be. Vainly would we in such cases endeavor to enter into the sentiments of others and divest ourselves of those propensities which are natural to us. We choose our favorite author as we do our friend, from a conformity of humor and disposition. So we indulge personal tastes, I take it, in friendship, where it's to be expected and even celebrated. We can do the same with beauty. So both are open to a kind of taste pluralism. And the essay, The Skeptic, tells us that each person has a, quote, predominant inclination to which his other desires and affections submit, and which governs him, though perhaps with some intervals, through the whole course of his life. And this may overstate matters a little bit, but his point is in line with what he says about the cheerful skeptic. Insofar as the lesson to be learned, I think, is that there may be an irreducible plurality of preferences among people, and there's nothing to do about it, and there's no reason to think we should. So the selectivity of friendship, in which we are supposed to follow personal taste, then, I think, is a kind of model for the presence of personal taste and judgments of taste. Hume offers something like aesthetic preferences to explain how we choose our friends. We look for a conformity of humor and disposition. And those who resemble us may evoke a peculiar sympathy, and so on. So I take it the choosing of friends is an exercise in this kind of a personal aesthetic taste. Taste may also be what brings friends together. So we're not surprised when friends share taste or forge their friendship on the basis of shared tastes. But a person may also have friends with at least some very different tastes. So I don't think that Hume is maintaining that shared tastes are some sort of requirement for friendship. I think that actually might get the direction of causality wrong. Friends may share tastes, but friends may also trust their friends with their tastes or to develop their tastes. Or they might do both. You know, it might go back and forth. I become friends with somebody because we share some tastes, and then that friend helps me to develop my tastes. And I think that can be the start of very beautiful friendships. So that is it. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I don't know, I've got to switch my.
There are several things in the chat now, I think.
Yeah, but the chat's like about, anyway, thank you very much, Amy, for the presentation on friendship.
Spiro's here. Hi, I know somebody.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you're all black boxes to me, but.
So if you want to pose a question in the chat, otherwise in the room, are there any questions? I've got a question.
Is it about a bottle companion?
No, it's not about a bottle companion. I like the idea of a bottle companion. No, it's about work, but I don't know. Well, shall I start with my question then? See, because in an early slide, he says you seem to be saying you shouldn't make friends with people you work with. That friendship should be a distraction from work. I wonder.
I think that was too strong. I said I think people in positions of authorities can sometimes find problem. You know,
because it's supposed to be friends between peers, but you can. Because I got the impression from that if you shouldn't make friends with people you work with, which is surely something you have in common.
I wasn't suggesting that. I gave this paper at the Hume conference last summer, also online. It was supposed to be in Bogota, but I was at my desk. And one of the people who spoke is a dean at a university. And she knows, you know, it's a real problem because she has fellow colleagues who are friends with hers, but she also sometimes has to be the authority figure, the dean. And, you know, the tension there is difficult. And I mean, I think the point I was trying to make, in nothing I was saying should have been like, you should be friends with somebody in this position, or you should not be friends with somebody in this position. I hope I said nothing that sounded like that. It's just that there are going to be tensions. friendship is one of the things that can create tensions,
Because it's supposed to be between peers, so if you're in a,
right? It's supposed to be between peers, but also because it can be in tension with other virtues,
Right.
like impartial judgment.
he seems to say that that's not so
Right.
bad.
Yeah.
Bad
Oh,
thing, possibly.
right. No, exactly. I'm saying, I mean, I think Hume thinks that a lot of virtues are in tension with one another. One thing that is very clear is Hume does not believe in the unity of the virtues. I'm saying something stronger, that I think that they can even be, as I said, in a certain kind of tension with each other. And so there's questions about how to negotiate them. But I remember the slide you're thinking of now. I had said that yes, friendship typically takes place between peers. So people in a position of dependence on one another, that's going to be a barrier to friendship.
Can you go back to the slide?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
It was a quote from Hume, wasn't it? And it was like, it was quite early, I think.
Yeah, it was. Why am I've actually kind of
Um,
lost some of my, I have,
There's the chat, you've got the chat up.
I do have the chat up, yes.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out how to go back. There we go. All right. So I didn't mean to actually. So before that, I think.
We just put in the number.
There we go. I think this. No, that's too far. Is it? Oh, is this what you're talking about? The friendship holds between peers?
No, it was somewhere specifically. You said that, you know, that it's supposed to be a distraction from your work. That I don't know if it's before,
Oh,
and
could
so
that have
you
been one
shouldn't
of?
be friends
Yeah.
with people at work. That seemed, okay, it might be the next one. I don't know which side it is.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't. If I said that, I didn't mean to.
So there's a quote, I thought there was a quote.
Or
You're supposed to, the friendship is supposed to be a distraction, and so you shouldn't be friends with. And there's before that, I think.
okay. Before this one, not that, not that.
Or maybe it's just me misreading.
Mhm. That's too far, sorry.
Well, it doesn't matter. I just thought it's
Yeah.
about,
But
yeah. I mean, obviously,
wait,
bottle companion with people you work with is unavoidable. But
right.
any further?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Has anyone got any other?
Yes, well, a few things. First, what is the difference between, for you, the difference between friendship and love?
Well, love,
Yeah.
love he uses very broadly. And so esteem is just a kind of love. I think there are kinds of love that are not friendship. And I think, as I was trying to suggest, that friendship has a number of additional features. There are many people I may love or even esteem, but because I don't have something like that relationship in exchange with them, I don't count as friends. But I do think if it's probably, if anything is a necessary constituent to friendship, some sort of love presumably is. Certainly, or I should say, certainly to the solid friendship I was talking about. The bottle companion may just be fellow feeling. But Hume does use love very, very broadly. It's a pleasurable feeling directed at another person is going to count as love, and they're just, it comes in any number of degrees and forms. So does that answer your question, or?
Well, yes, partly. I just was wondering in sort of how much love is in friendship.
Yeah, I don't think anything I've said would settle that question, and I think there are so many different kinds of friendship. They all certainly involve something like a warm feeling, even the bottle companion, presumably. Right. After a few bottles, even more. I have a great story I'll tell you later about, it was described at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, the 5 stages of Mexican friendship, which involved a bottle. Yeah, I mean, I would presume that any talk of friendship would involve some sort of warm feelings that could qualify as a faint kind of love in the Humean account. But the solid friendship I was talking about, it would seem to me, would involve fairly high degrees of it. I mean, I can't, in no way do I want to suggest that there are necessary and sufficient conditions for friendship here, but I find it unintelligible to think of talking about somebody being a friend if you didn't have some degree of love towards them. They would be somebody you work with, or somebody you were forced into companionship with, or something like that. Although having said that, Hume, I think, Hume allows our passions and sentiments to be complex enough that you can have, I believe, fairly mixed feelings about things. So you can at times, for instance, even have sympathy for your enemy. And you can admire qualities of your enemy. I take it that typically with an enemy, you don't establish, again, the kinds of exchange and so forth that is crucial to friendship. But, you know, you might have love-hate relationships with various people. And I don't think there's anything he says that rules that out. But I would assume that, you know, friendship and it goes hand in hand with some kind of love, and the closer the friendship, the stronger the love.
The other question was taste, about taste. How does a human being for you acquire taste?
That's a good,
This is something
yeah.
what because I got from you that you take it as a given. You interpret Hume that he takes
Right.
it as a given. We have taste.
Mhm.
But then I got a little bit stuck by the title of The Middle Station of Life, this article.
Yeah.
Which is, as far as I can see, a reference to Dante, the Divina Commedia.
I don't think so. It's middle class. It's an economic class.
Oh, the middle
Yeah.
station.
Yes, yeah.
It's
No, yeah, no, yes, it's middling station. It's not being among the great and wealthy, or being among the poor.
Oh, okay, because I interpreted it as the middle stage more in terms of
Right.
stage.
Yes. No, it's station as in your class station.
Okay, all
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
all right. Then I listen to
This
you.
is what I said. It's very interesting that a very similar argument is made by Adam Smith, who is in his theory of moral sentiments, is, you know, quite interested in the ways in which class affects moral sentiments.
Okay. No, then
Okay,
but,
yeah.
so
I'd
the problem-
love it if it was making a reference to Dante. That would open up all sorts of things. But yeah.
So I was wondering then exactly again, how do you acquire taste? And how
Yeah.
how does he interpret, for example,
There we go.
I mean, you won't talk about it, I
Mhm.
suspect, about friendship between kids. Yeah. And
right.
so on. So that's
Yeah.
something that
Yeah. I was describing it as a kind of exercise in aesthetic taste. This is very good. It's an excellent question. And it's something I don't think I fully worked out, the sort of tension between. So in the essay of the standard of taste, in looking for a standard for what is basically a response to, you know, beauty is no object in things themselves. but he also wants to say that not everybody's tastes are the same. So he's looking for experts in taste. And this is where he comes up with these true judges, the talk of the true judges. So, I mean, I don't know, is this the case in French? There's sort of an ambiguity between saying somebody has taste, meaning they have good taste, and then just talking about somebody's sort of taste, which could be good or bad. So my suggestion is probably in choosing your particular selective friends, you're always exercising personal taste. You might not have good taste. You might have terrible taste in friends. Children might have undeveloped taste. And you're absolutely right. I think I was kind of going back and forth between the two senses, between a developed one and just the personal predilection, which may be a matter of what he says. I think it's the next slide. The predilections, the humor, the temperament, and so forth. The reason though I was kind of mixing them up is that I want to say that even among the very best, even among the expert judges, the true judges in aesthetic taste, those personal predilections nonetheless remain. So there's a diversity there. So the true judge, to develop good taste, standard setting taste, many tastes will be discarded, right? And the question would be how you develop, to go back to the previous slide, these qualities here: the strong sense, delicate sentiment, improved by practice, perfected by comparison, cleared of all prejudice. And that seems to be so the question is how you develop those traits. And there's a great deal of discussion in aesthetics literature about this. The example, which I took out of this paper, that Hume gives of sort of the trustworthiness of good taste is where he quotes Sancho Panza from Don Quixote, talking about his ancestors who were renowned judges of wine. Do you know this story, anybody? Or it's a great story. Yeah. I actually have to go. I haven't gone and looked up Don Quixote to see it, but so they go to a village and there is a hogshead of wine, which is a giant vat of wine.
Right.
It's a very funny term in English, right? And they're told it's a magnificent wine. You'll love this, and you are such great wine tasters. Try this. So they try it, and the one ancestor of Sancho Panza says, "Oh, it's nice, but tastes a little metallic." And the other one says, "It's nice, but it tastes a little bit like leather." And everybody laughs at them. "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." And then they drain the vat and they find a key on a leather thong at the bottom of it, which proves that their taste is good. And then Hume says, and so you can see how this is exactly the same in literature and plays. And you're like, what? There's no leather key to find in these cases. But so the question is how would you determine that somebody has that kind of delicate sentiment? And I think it's a matter, I mentioned this in the paper, a matter of doing things like being able to point to traits. I have done a lot of philosophy of art and painting, so I'm always thinking in terms of paintings, but pointing to something and saying, look at that, see how that works, and you can teach somebody to sort of see that and perhaps change their taste or develop their taste. So I think teaching people to see it is part of it. In some ways, the good judge is always is being a standard for human response to things as pleasurable or unpleasurable. So it's a matter of kind of getting other humans to see it.
Isn't then, in your sense, then aren't then friendship sort of tests of taste?
I think so. I think that can be right. Yeah. I mean, many people have terrible tastes in friends. So yeah, I think that's right. But I go back to the point I was saying that even though among the good judges, there's going to be room for all sorts of diversity.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, some people like Mozart, some people like Beethoven. And some people may actually like Celine Dion, but you know, they're wrong. And but the Mozart and Beethoven are
Yeah.
are good. Does this address the question?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
I think, so it's in fact already sort of there's a given taste and then there's a refinement of the taste.
I think so, yeah. And the give and taste, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether it's given and unchangeable. It's that there's no point in disputing it.
Which explains also the plurality. Then.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's innocent and diverse, right?
Yeah.
So the moral pluralism that I was trying to push, I think there's actually reasons for that in relatively complicated societies where people have to take on different roles. And perhaps for that same reason, there's a kind of demand, I think, on people as moral judges to appreciate different virtues, even if they don't develop them themselves. But I don't think it's the case in the aesthetic case in the same way. But,
Thank you.
well, thank you. That was very helpful. That I'm always trying to clarify I see analogies and then these differences, and I'm always trying to figure out like how they map onto each other. So that's good.
Do you have a question?
Well, maybe yes, I have a question about. I was wondering if Hume do a link between sympathy, like a psychological state of mind, and the exercising of taste, because I don't know, it's not clear, quite clear in my mind, but is there a kind of, for me, a link between sympathy, an influence between sympathy and the taste?
Yeah, also a very good question. I would think that sharing tastes would make sympathy easier. And I think being in sympathy with somebody would make it easier to share their taste, which is probably what you were thinking of. Yeah.
You were
Mhm.
thinking about plurality and about taste, plurality of taste.
Right.
And I was wondering if this plurality can be found also in the psychological state of mind. Also.
Yeah.
We
Let's
kind
see.
of different kind of psychological profiles in a way. So.
Right. Well, I think that it is one of the ways that we develop our characters, and including sometimes changing our characters and maybe develop our taste, is by being in sympathy with certain kinds of people. Sometimes it's just a matter of being around them a lot, you know. But the more similar you become to another person, the easier it would be to be in sympathy with them. And the more you're in sympathy with them, the easier it is to pick up their tastes, I think. Well, and actually, I have a very simple way of putting it, now that I think about it. So sympathy, so in the Hume literature, sympathy is almost always talked about as this causal mechanism for communicating passions, or sentiments, that the term that Hume gets from, I believe, from French, actually, I think from Dubois, and starts to use kind of in place of passions. It's all very strange. But it also communicates opinions or beliefs. And you're getting people, so sympathy communicates people's emotions, their opinions, and sentiments can also be used to mean their tastes as well. So you're getting all of those. But the question about the diversity, sympathy, I think, can get, you can sympathize with a wider range of diverse people, not all of whom are your friends, not all of whom are like you. And you can, it can create this kind of psychological diversity, I think you were talking about. I think that's right. It's a very interesting sort of extension of what I was saying. So thank you. Have we lost all the online people? Or
There are messages.
No, their messages, those are from me, you can look at them, but
yeah,
I've
a couple
I've
people.
got to, yeah, I've asked them to submit questions in the chat.
Oh, there's,
But there's not one yet. No, that's just the
Okay.
paper and the slides.
yes.
So I've got a follow-up question to Matthias's question about friendship and love. How does marriage fit in? Because he showed that he's for monogamy, but we don't exactly know why. But how?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just against polygamy. There should be polyandry as well. He's got a vision of
No, he's
marriage as monogamy.
he's totally for monogamy.
So how does friendship and love fit in, or is it about having children, or what?
Yeah, I mean, there's several essays where he talks about this. He's got, I think, frankly, very bourgeois tastes in marriage. It's, he's thinks polygamy is terrible. He gets very, very disappointed when he had a great admiration for the ancient Greeks until he found out about the seclusion of women. It was just like actually really, I think it was sort of devastating for him. Yeah, he seemed okay with slavery in some points, but I mean, I don't know. The comments he makes are all over the place, and I'm not quite sure how to bring them all together to address this. In the passage I read from the essay of Polygamy and Divorces, I take it that he's offering marriage, he's conceiving of marriage largely in terms of a kind of friendship. And notice he says one marriage, a few friends. I mean, he's talking about the several friends and then a bunch of companions. The rather famously and infamously, his discussion of the virtues of chastity, of sexual chastity and modesty, which is in the Treatise of Human Nature and the Inquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals. He talks about sort of why women are required to be chaste and modest and men are not. And he argues there, I shouldn't say just suggests, he argues that this is an artificial, what he calls an artificial virtue, and it rests on a social construction of a certain ideal of chaste and modest behavior, but that arises because paternity is often not known.
Does that rule women out as drinking?
Well, that there is good reason, at least in most societies. Yeah, it might. I mean,
it's not modest behavior.
Yeah, I think it will depend on what constitutes chastity and modesty for him. Will depend on circumstances a great deal. But it's a really interesting move because he both wants to make it what he calls an artificial virtue. So there's nothing like deep in human nature. It's not as if women are, for instance, more prone to be chaste and modest. It's to, given the need for children to receive parental care, the tendency for parents to care mostly about children who are theirs and not others, and certain property relations. Chastity and modesty on the part of women so that men feel confident that the children they are raising are theirs, and therefore will extend due care for them. And then this gets extended over all women, even those who are past childbearing age, by a kind of trick of the imagination, because the imagination is sort of, doesn't keep to very tight
Kind
bounds.
of a bait and switch.
It is a kind of a bait and switch, yes. I'm so glad you could work that into this now.
But they're included
Yeah.
by default.
They're included kind of by default. And it's a very weird thing. So people have tried to sort of make different accounts of this. What would happen if, paternity tests were available, or if there were different ways of caring for children. And given that Hume knew both about French societies at his time and also like ancient Roman practices, where you adopted children all the time who were not related to you, or not even children. It's a little bit odd. But that I take it is going to be very important to what he says about marriage. So, he definitely understands sexual attraction. I don't think he has any very mysterious views about that. It's nice and it happens. The model of the relationship between married people does seem to be friendship, but there's this additional thing about the raising of children. And that, I think, does change the nature of marriage quite a bit for him.
It sounds a bit like
From
married men
friendship.
should have other friends, whereas married women, it's not
Yeah.
such a
That's
a good idea.
I don't know. He would be
Except
so
maybe
appalled
other
at the
women.
idea of married men that he was rather homophobic. But I'm actually not making him sound very good, am I?
But he didn't have amongst his friends married men. I'm sure he did.
Well, he turned a blind eye, but no, he actually argues that he argued that the ancient Greeks approved of homosexuality because they thought it promoted friendship, even though it is clearly yucky, even though it's clearly disgusting. So they thought that this disagreeable thing was useful, so they could hold it to be a virtue. But we now know that it's not necessary for friendship, so it can just be, he thinks of it as rather vicious.
But this, just that the model for friendship seems what you said to apply to men, but not to women. And it's
No, I think it does apply to women. And I actually do think it applies to women. I also think he has not maybe the bottle companion,
right.
but other kinds of friendship between men and women, absolutely he's in favor of. So, I was making him sound really kind of horrible, but he very much enjoyed the company of women. He enjoyed, salons of mixed company. He said he enjoyed the company of modest women, is the way he put it, but also had lots of girlfriends. So, but he was, some things I was saying before about not beyond dislike, the revulsion at the seclusion of women practiced by the ancient Greeks was because he thought, one of the greatest things about contemporary society is the ability for men and women to mix in intelligent and polite company. And he very much enjoyed the company of intelligent, women who could discuss
Intelligent and modest.
and modest. Yes, right, yeah. I think modest there just means, well, no, probably more just polite. They have polished manners, right? They're not, and he might, he does talk about modesty in several different senses. So there's sexual modesty. There's also the modesty which is governed by rules of politeness, where you don't go boasting about yourself, for instance, which is a kind of accommodation to other people's pride. So pride being, as he says, one of the best things you can have as a person of character is a well-founded pride that is well concealed. So it's good to be, in some ways, you want to have good reasons for pride. Nothing wrong with pride, but it does grate on other people. And so we come up with rules of politeness so that my pride doesn't, become very, very bothersome to somebody else's pride. And that's one sense of modesty for him. So when he talked about the company of modest women, he may mean that partly as well. But I'm not completely sure about that. I haven't.
Well, because it's possible that he thinks that same kind of immodesty is a worse trait in women than in men, which is quite common.
Do you mean
it's worse
the prideful
for a woman to show off
her
excellence and qualities
Right.
than for a man.
I have no
female Caesar would be even worse.
Right. I have
Caesar.
no reason to think that he thinks that. I mean, he might have, but there's nothing in his work to support that point that I can think of, at least. I haven't looked. He does think sexual modesty is required of women because of this, as he says, peculiar or very slight anatomical difference. But I don't think that he does say some things because he tends to think that women are physically weaker and that and so cannot show their resentment in the same way. And so there's questions about how societies are set up to take care of that. But I don't think this goes to the level of what he sometimes calls the little morality of manners. Exactly. But is this actually addressing your question, or did I go like way off on?
I think that's. I think it wasn't clear from your talk what the difference or the place of women and men were in his.
No.
To me, it seems he clearly has a different kind of ideal for women in friendship and marriage than for men, and that what.
I don't. Well, but going back to where's the polygamy and divorces thing?
Because you might be disgusted with polygamy just because men are allowed to do it, but not women. That doesn't seem to be the case.
No, that's not it. He's disgusted. I mean, he's here assuming that in polygamy, it's the one man with the many wives. But look at this lower quote, right? Okay. The sovereignty of the male is a real usurpation, right? I mean, it's unjust and destroys that nearness of rank, not to say equality. I mean, that is to say equality, right? Which nature has established between the sexes. There are other places he talks about an inequality, a physical inequality between the sexes. So we are by nature their lovers, their friends, their patrons. So I do take it. He's not quite Mary Wollstonecraft, but it's close, that the model of the relations between, independently of children and so forth, the model of the relationships between husbands and wives is that of friendship.
Excellent.
So, which is, I think, a good thing.
We haven't had any.
No, but Vanessa and Gunu, I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name. They're both there, so hi.
Maybe we can stop the recording, and then I think it's time for a bit more bottled friendship, I would say.